There's a reason why each and every one of the 6 books that I've written over the years has hundreds of pages of endnotes that people can check. There's a reason why, after 400 pages of culture of corruption, the Obama administration, the Obama campaign couldn't find one single thing wrong,
right.
Or single thing libelous or slanderous that I had said.
They probably audited you, though, I would bet. So glad to have this next guest. She was the first guest on this program. Oh my gosh, I'm blocking the camera here. Her new book is out, Sold Out, How High-Tech Billionaires and Bipartisan Beltway Crap Weasels Are Screwing America's Best and Brightest Workers. And I can bet that's a censored title that went back and forth with the publisher. You can find her at michellemalkin.com. Mrs. Malkin, thank you so much for being here.
Always a pleasure, Steve.
I don't, everyone has to say that, but this show is not always that case. So, okay, full disclosure. My wife did not let me know that there was a package in the mail. It came this week, so I haven't read all of it. I've only read through a chapter here today. But I want you to describe the book for people out there who may not know about it. And the one thing that strikes me here is we've been painted, I guess, conservatives as the party of big banks and supporting corporate cronies. You kind of tip that myth and put it on its head in this book, don't you?
Well, I do. It was a great opportunity to go back to my investigative journalism roots, and there really is a line that you could draw between Invasion, which is my very first book, chronicling all the ways in which lax immigration enforcement paved the way for the 9/11 terrorist attacks, to Culture of Corruption, which talked about all of the backroom crony deals and all the back scratching and obviously the ideological and the campaign finance reporting that went into that book and compiling everything that we now see come to fruition with the Obama administration. And in a way, Sold Out is sort of like a combination of Invasion and Culture of Corruption on steroids, because it takes a look at something that's been neglected in all of the brouhaha over immigration policies, and that is the entire plethora of these alphabet soups of visa programs, guest worker rackets, which are the result of collusion between big government and big business. And my co-author, John Miano, is a software programmer turned lawyer who himself witnessed what we're seeing more now of these stories coming out of American workers who have been forced to train their cheap foreign substitutes who are H1B visa holders. And
right.
That program celebrates its 25th anniversary, and it's definitely high time that we reexamine the consequences and impact of it on American workers and American sovereignty. And in fact, it is now at the center of much of the debate of the GOP presidential field, and we really feel that we have contributed to forcing that issue to the forefront.
No, I don't think it would be an issue at all if not discussed by the GOP. So when you talk about that, I guess as far as solution, do people go as far as sort of like Trump idea protectionism, where we're just going to punish anyone who's not here in the States? How far do we go while keeping things free and open and still looking out for the United States' best interest? Because I'm sure you'll get criticism from all sides on that.
Well, I think, first of all, people really need to be informed and educated about the roots of the program itself, what was supposedly guaranteed in the law when it was created 25 years ago in the 1990 immigration so-called reform law. Mm-hmm. And part of the deal was that before any American company was able to bring over this cheap foreign pipeline of workers who are not the best and brightest around the world, I think that's one of the biggest myths, there were basic American worker protections. And I think that protectionism has become a bad word, mm-hmm. when in fact, as it's supposed to be enforced in the law, it's about protecting American sovereignty. And each and every one of our immigration and entrance programs is supposed to be created to benefit America first. I mean, the preamble to the Constitution says to secure the blessings of liberty, not for every tech journeyman worker around the world who wants to come here and work for $1.21 an hour, is to secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity.
Right.
And I say this obviously as somebody who is a child of legal immigrants. My father came here 45 years ago offering a highly specialized skill. He was one of the few training neonatologists who was here in the country. He went to Johns Hopkins. He was the creme de la creme.
Right.
But when you actually look at the data of the people who are coming here on H1B visas, they are mediocre and subpar in the kind of technical skills that they bring. And obviously that's exposed by the fact that it is high-skilled American workers who are forced to train them and provide them with all the skills they need to do their job, which is then offshored back to India or China. How in any way does that benefit our country?
That's a good point. What would you say, I guess, to people who would, like, let's take Carly Fiorina as example. I know you're not a big fan in certain respects, and in some others maybe so. What would you say to people who say, well, sometimes if a company is going to go under, it's better to outsource, say, 30,000 jobs than just lose 80,000 overall for the company? Or do you think that if the company can't make it by employing American workers, that, well, that's just the dice they roll?
Well, I think that the problem that John and I have is that you have these free enterprise preaching American companies that really act as American in name only. And what they want to do is exploit the power of government and these programs to rig the market. And, that is evident in many of the appendices that we include in the book, where you've got collusion between Google and Apple behind the scenes, behind closed doors, fixing wages.
Right.
And the fact is that one of the biggest pieces of propaganda that we bust wide open is this idea from the H1B cheerleaders and their propagandists that there is some severe tech worker shortage in America. And it is absolutely the biggest lie that's been concocted over the last quarter century, because the fact is that 1/3 to 1/2 of all of tech jobs are now taken by these H1B visa holders.
Right.
And meanwhile, you have 11 million out of 15 million American STEM diploma holders who are unable to find jobs.
Right. Yeah, I've always sort of lived by the philosophy, there's a simplistic version of be American, buy American. I said, well, hold on, be American, buy the best. But then there is an irony in that a lot of these big companies are not producing the best, but they're able to become and stay big companies because the government subsidizes people who aren't the best. I'm not really into the party politics of big business or small business. I'm the party of good business, and that's whether you're big or small. Do you think a lot of people miss that when they think about conservatives? They think about them as these big bank people, and I think some of them are. Listen, we have some people in the Republican Party who I know you've spoken out against adamantly. But big government always favors big business, and smaller, middle-of-the-road businesses tend to benefit from less intervention. Do you think that's a point that isn't driven home enough from the right? Because if I'm running for office right now, that would be a focal point for me. Am I off base?
Yes, it absolutely isn't emphasized by enough of the Republican Party, and that's because so many of them are in the hip pockets of these big business CEOs and the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, and it affects both ends, both parts of the spectrum of the wage scale. Because on the one hand, you've got the likes of Marco Rubio and Jeb Bush serving their H1B visa expansionist masters, and it's not a coincidence that these, of course, are the same people who espouse massive illegal alien amnesties, also supported by the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. And as much as I have many disagreements with Donald Trump, who has called me a dummy and stupid, the one thing that he is not stupid about is resonating with ordinary American workers and American business owners who do not want any intervention at all. They just want to be left alone. And, he was one of the few, and, we give credit in the last chapter of the book to those Republican candidates who have been at least more than superficially aware of the impact of these programs. And that includes Rick Santorum and most recently even Mike Huckabee. Of course, he's been open borders on amnesty for a long time, but even now he's changing his tune. And Ted Cruz last week, who is delicately pivoting on this issue as well after calling for quintupling the number of H1B visas and buying into a lot of the tech worker shortage propaganda. But there are a lot of good people on Capitol Hill who have finally exposed the program. And I think the one talking point that is most annoying to us and that we're really trying to educate people on is it's not that there is abuse in the program. The fact is the entire program is abuse. The
Right.
entire program is fraudulent. And we took great pains to amass an amazing amount of data and analysis. Journalists are lazy. And the Washington Press Corps in particular, of course, is so ideologically bent on the open borders agenda, whether it's, on these legal guest worker programs or on the illegal alien amnesty side. And we're trying to circumvent all that and, really reach people, where they can assess the information for themselves. And, open source is what my entire journalism career has been all about. People need to just do their own homework and judge the facts for themselves.
Well, that's what's so funny is you have a formal, background in journalism and you talk about investigative journalism, but you've always, when I first came on the scene, you and Andrew Breitbart were kind of the people, if you could speak with them and pick their brain. And you were always a huge champion of the blogger, of the person with nothing but a website. You put them, as long as their information was accurate, on the same playing field as mainstream journalism. So that's one thing I think, when you say that and people, they go, well, yes, exactly. So we can't trust anyone without a journalism degree. There is such a disdain right now for people online. I'm a comedian. I'm an entertainer. I always tell people, don't just use my site as your own reference for information. But we adhere to more journalistic ethics than most people out there. If something is wrong, we correct it. If we make a joke that is maybe really inaccurate or misleading, we're like, oh, by the way, that's a joke. What do you think? Obviously, this book is necessary, but even more necessary is cutting through what the journalists have sold, right? This is racist. This is racist. This is anti-immigrant is what they'll tell you. How do you see the state of modern journalism going?
Yeah, well, I think the dinosaur media obviously has been upended since the days of Drudge and Breitbart and, the rise of the blogosphere. And now we're sort of in a post-blogosphere era with, so many sources bombarding us. And I think it really is sort of an educational mission to get people to hone their radars. And for me, of course, transparency has been, one of my number one rules of ethics, hyperlinking everything, citing everything. There's a reason why each and every one of the 6 books that I've written over the years has hundreds of pages of endnotes that people can check. There's a reason why, after 400 pages of culture of corruption, the Obama administration, the Obama campaign couldn't find one single thing wrong, or one single thing libelous or slanderous that I had said.
They probably audited you, though, I would bet.
And I think that the thing that I'd say with all of this cacophony, especially in the sort of clickbaity era of social media on the right, is that when people actually have new information to bring to the fore, when they're breaking something, when they're offering a new perspective, and when they do the things that you do, just in terms of immediately seeing through false narratives and being able to respond quickly in decimating this agenda and these arguments, that's when you're most effective. And honestly, of all the things that I've done all the years, it's books like this that are the most edifying to do, certainly more than 2-minute hits on TV.
Sure. 1 second. We're going to go to the web extended version where you don't have to say crap, so you can say whatever. The book is sold out. If you're listening on radio, louderwithcrowder.com, we do an extended web-only version. Michelle Malkin knows all about that. Stay tuned, CC. Okay, Michelle, there's no FCC. Not that you're a profane lady by any means or by any stretch.
Every once in a while.
Well, it's funny. I saw you drop that F-bomb on Twitter, and I did it for the first time during the debates when they asked, you know what it was for me? My moment, I remember it was Ben Carson when they asked him about a supplement that he endorsed. And he said, I didn't endorse it. I've used the product, but I didn't endorse it. I don't have a relationship with the company. And they said, well, your picture's on their site. And he said, well, they've done that without my knowledge. I have no. And they said, well, does that speak to your vetting process? That's when I dropped the F-bomb on Twitter. I couldn't believe how far we'd gone. But you definitely, I would say, do you feel yourself, is it because you're generally such a, the term happy warrior. Do you find it hard to be that way? You find yourself being so frustrated? 2015 for me is probably one of the most pivotal years in my life as far as culture and how the country's changed.
Yeah, it's this way every election season. People lose their heads, they lose their sense of perspective. And I don't know. I think I've approached this campaign season with more sort of sobriety and not jadedness, I suppose, resignation in a way, because it's never going to change.
Oh, geez.
But in one sense, though, it certainly has been entertaining, and there have been a lot of upset apple carts. And even though the upsetters are not, exactly the people that I would have picked,
right.
The people that are upset make me happy.
Right.
Makes me happy to see them having indigestion.
Well, what's funny is when you say that, people are going to go, oh, partisan politics. You're talking just as much about Republicans and conservatives.
Oh, I'm only talking about Republicans.
Well, yeah, exactly. I didn't want to put words in your mouth, but you were remarkably consistent.
Yeah. The other thing I would say is that, there are two festering landscapes right now, two ground zeros, and one obviously is the political battleground, but the other one, of course, is where we cut our teeth, college campuses.
Right.
And the last outbreak of the whiners at Mizzou, it again, Steve, it just seems like nothing ever changed. It's Oberlin all over again.
Well, I do think, I did the Joe Rogan podcast, and he's like, that's a great example. Conservatives, and I don't say this to condemn conservatives, and I'm not putting words in your mouth. I'm speaking on my behalf here. But you look at top talk shows, right? Pretty much all the top talk shows outside of, I think, two are conservative. They're not even close to relevant in the podcast sphere. You have someone like Joe Rogan who gets over 17 million downloads a month. And he's someone who, they were sponsored by Fleshlight, a porno toy for a long time. They don't talk about, they believe Moses wasn't edible mushrooms, conspiracy theorists. And even they had me on, Gavin McGinnis, Milo Yiannopoulos in the same week, because the cultural pendulum has shifted where they're going, I don't know if I was always just asleep to this, but everything is racist, everything is sexist. And I think the people at Mizzou, the Black Lives Matter, for you, a silver lining, if you think nothing changes, I think for the first time, most people are going, this is ridiculous now. This is getting to the point where it's beyond parody. And I think you might see that swing back. You don't think so?
Not as long as the entire higher ed bubble is floated by federal student loan program. Glenn Reynolds, the blog godfather, Instapundit, has been signaling the bursting of the higher ed bubble for a couple of years now. I guess I could allow some iota of optimism to seep into into Casa Malkin. That we may be closer than we ever have been, but we're still a long way off. On the sort of elementary scale of it, of course, you see more and more families like mine, just revolting from the formal school system altogether and homeschooling. And so, eventually in a generation that's going to hopefully reap some benefits when these kids decide that they're, going to forego expensive, overinflated Ivy League brainwashing educations and just do something productive with their lives instead.
This is true.
So,
and even though, for those listening, Michelle won't say it, her children are geniuses. Half of it I attribute to her upbringing. The other half simply to genetics and that they're Asian. So listen, we all know that if you want to see social justice warriors' eyes go dead like dolls' eyes, just say, what about Asians? In every single facet, they outperform everyone else, and it includes, whether it's, I know it's an all-income, but whether it includes Vietnamese, people who came over fleeing war, whether it includes Japanese whose parents were in internment camps. Like, how does that happen so quickly and so consistently across the board? And they'll tell you, well, the language is more mathematically inclined. It's like, just stop it. Just let's stop with it. But your children are obviously very talented. It's funny, we were talking about that. I was talking about this with my dad. Now, people say I did go to college. I went to college for few semesters. Did really well when I started, and then bombed out. I was doing stand-up and didn't show up to class. I still have nightmares of that final semester transcript because I showed up for maybe 20% of the classes. But I was talking with my dad, and my dad, went to U of M, and he was like, well, there still is a college experience. This is my opinion, and I am curious for someone like you who is very, I would say, meticulous in the way you raise and educate your children. They're very bright. I don't say that just superficially. I argue there's really nothing in the college experience beyond the 4 years of glorified alcoholism that can't be experienced with an online degree and a good job or internship. Do you think so, or am I off base? Should there still be a physical building?
Well, if the goal is, some sort of socialization, and you can find a college where that does not translate into some sort of perverse ideological hijacking,
right?
Then it's worth it. I mean, there's always been the goal of finding a mate in college, and that's much harder online, although with all these online dating services, not as hard as it used to be, I suppose.
And you won't retroactively be accused of rape, so there's that.
That's true. So, but what I'd say is that, my husband and I have absolutely evolved in our thinking compared to our parents' generation, parents and grandparents who came here as immigrants or daughters and sons of immigrants. And it used to be that, college education was the ticket to success, and there was no other way around it.
Right.
And now, of course, what you want to do is circumvent that.
Right.
By all means possible. And we are certainly open to the idea of both or one or both of our children not going to college.
Really? Now, you say that, but in your heart of hearts, if you're
Oh, yes. If they have an entrepreneurial idea and they can convince us with an investment plan that it's worth investing in, absolutely wouldn't have any qualms about it.
Wow.
No.
Well, that's big, because my dad said that, and I told, you've never met my father, but I remember I was talking with Jared about this. My dad was really do what I say, not as I do, because he just tested off. He was in hockey, U of M. New York Rangers were looking at him. He won't talk about this. He's like the most humble guy. I had to go find his records and watch him play in a house league and score more than the top 5 other scorers combined in a regional, but also spend more time in the penalty box. I was like, he's really good. And my uncle sort of gave me the story on him. But he also, Pursuit of Happiness is a film with Will Smith. Worked at Dean Witter. My dad just tested off the charts and got a job there. Didn't even finish school. Jumped from school to there. Hated Wall Street, hated the bubble, hated the fakery like you're talking about. But still, he still had that inclination where I had to go to college. He would say the same thing with hockey. He'd be like, pardon my language, he'd be like, every wussy with a capital P in the NHL wears a visor. They're the first one to challenge you to a fight and the first one to look to a ref when you call them on it. And then he'd look to me and go, but Steven, you should wear a visor. And it was the same thing with school. I really was like, listen, I'm going to be doing stand-up. But I still had to go for a year because he thought this is kind of what you do. And looking back, he even admitted, he said, you know what? I just don't think you were designed for it. And I think he's learned a little bit from that. So it's very, very rare for parents to be consistent with that. And you really, if your son or daughter said, nope, no school for me, you'd be okay with it.
Yeah. And both of them know that already. And
wow.
I think because they've had such an unorthodox mix of schooling, I mean, they've tasted every single kind of school delivery.
True.
Super shishi private schools, public schools, regular ones, charter schools, and now homeschooling with my son. And so they're not wedded to the idea that they need some sort of credential or, bumper sticker on the back of the car bragging about which college they've gotten into to, assess their own self-worth or success in life. I think that outside of the sort of Beltway, Manhattan, super high-achieving tiger mom, tiger dad bubble, that this is still a fairly radical notion. But
right.
I don't know. In flyover country, it's probably more the norm than that.
Well, that's true. And, I hear this a lot from conservatives who say it, but they don't really mean it. I mean, you go through the top hosts or pundits, they say, well, what about trades? But all their kids, they get them into Ivy League schools. And I'm going, well, how can none of you actually, follow through with it? I'm not saying you forbid your kids from going to Ivy League schools, but every single one of them, rat-tat-tat-tat-tat, you go down the list, or most of the conservative authors, right? What's the first thing you read in their byline? Harvard law grad, U of M, magna cum laude. We do have a culture of reinforcing, like you said, you hit the nail on the head, your self-worth attached to a piece of paper, which now can be gotten online more quickly and more productively.
Yeah, and I think because we're so immersed in the online world, we see. I mean, my son has used science lessons from all sorts of sources on YouTube, and not just the Khan Academy. I mean, there are kids out there that are producing amazing tutorials. I mean, we're doing a physics unit right now, and it's been absolutely indispensable to have all of that open source type of knowledge. But just to bring this back to a policy point, you've got this entire federal education racket. And one of their big talking points, of course, is college readiness. And that is how they've sold the entire Common Core racket.
Right.
That somehow that we need Washington, D.C. to judge what quote-unquote high standards are and spend hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars on crappy pieces of technology and curriculum that are drawn by left-wing Alinskyite pedagogues. And the entire racket serves a lot of these same Silicon Valley CEOs. There's a reason why you had iPads and Microsoft and Google all rushing to brand everything Common Core. And it actually does tie back into the book. I'm so good at this because it's my job,
very good.
right? But you've got Bill Gates, pressing for Common Core on the one hand, and then on the other hand, calling for busting open the H1B cap so that it's absolutely unlimited. So why does he do that? Why spend so much capital, both financial and intellectual and PR capital on pumping Common Core? Because it perpetuates this idea that our school system and every aspect of school delivery are not producing high-skilled American workers. It perpetuates the idea that there's this American tech worker shortage, which we know is false just by the sheer numbers. But then in essence, what it also does, which is very insidious, is because he's actually lowering standards, he's actually going ahead and accomplishing, helping create a high-tech worker shortage.
Yes.
It's brilliant.
While indoctrinating an entire generation, hopefully with free college, of course, if you hear Bernie Sanders tell it. What I find funny about that, it's like, and I tweeted this out, and no one had thought of it. I'm going, think of this, Mitsu. Bernie Sanders wants you to have this racist, patriarchal experience for free. I mean, if people, these black students, feminist students, I'm going, okay, this is going to be incredibly politically incorrect here. So you can feel free to rebuke me so that no one associates with you. But if you are, let's say, a black student or a feminist, or you see yourself as a marginalized minority, and you can't feel comfortable on campus with affirmative action and liberal professors and free speech circles and trigger warnings, the real world doesn't get much better. And I don't know if you saw Dartmouth, but, they came in and they were yelling, if we can't have it, tear it down. Did you see that Black Lives Matter? Did you see this?
Yeah.
And they said to one girl, F your tears, whitey, F your white tears. So I'm sitting there, I'm going, okay, that's not productive, right? This is college right now. That's obviously not productive. That's not going to change anyone's mind. But that will breed incredible racism because you know what? It's not natural. This is a mob mentality. It's not natural to feel a complete lack of empathy to an innocent person who's crying. So the extreme example of that is we can get to the point where they can justify violent actions. Scale it back, they're laughing at a crying girl solely because she's white. You know what's going to happen? That girl's boyfriend, who watches her cry and get mocked, could possibly become a racist for the rest of his life. Not saying it's justified, but I think the experience of 22-year-old men or people who go to college right now who aren't part of these social justice activist groups are becoming angry. And it really is so divisive. I think you're going to see more people prejudiced than before because the complaints don't reflect their reality. Again, you can totally disagree with me, but that's the one thing I notice on college campuses right now. And that's what's, in my opinion, so destructive to the learning experience.
Yeah. And I think that's what I mean by some things haven't changed. Because when I was at Oberlin in the late 1980s and 1990s, this was really the first advent of modern multiculturalism. They were eliminating Western civilization requirements. And this was the milieu in which Dinesh D'Souza first broke out. Of course, he came from Dartmouth University himself, and his very first book, which I think was his best book, was called Illiberal Education, and he just examined all of the festering racial tensions which were stoked by all of these liberal social engineering policies intended to eliminate racial tensions.
Right.
So, and with particular regard to Asian students, of course, I think there has been one positive development, because after all this time, many of these woolly-headed Asian liberal students, mostly on the West Coast, are finally realizing that racial preference policies, which they blindly supported for the last 3 decades, of course, hurt Asian students the most. And it's always been that way.
Right.
And yet there they were. I mean, I went to the Berkeley campus to speak, and there they were all marching against me as if I was the traitor and the sellout, when in fact it's these liberal Asian civil rights activists who've been selling out their ethnicity by backing all of these so-called progressive policies to manufacture a utopia which will never exist.
It's a good point. I was asked at CPAC by an Asian reporter, why do you think Asians are so overwhelmingly democratic, and what can Republicans do? And it was kind of a gotcha question. I said, listen, I can't speak on behalf of the entire Asian community, but I think freedom should appeal to everybody. I think economic prosperity should appeal to everybody. But I was sitting there going, okay, it doesn't make sense for Asians to be particularly liberal unless you account for the fact that nearly all of them go to very, very high-level schools and outperform everybody else. So it's sort of, I read about it. I can't remember where I read about this, but a lot of their parents came here, became shopkeepers, became business owners, saved and scraped to send their kids to school. And they're more conservative, but now the kids haven't experienced that, and they're going to Dartmouth or Harvard, and they become a liberal because it's the default position. Do you see, because what's the stat? It's something like 70-something% of Asian Americans vote Democrat. Am I incorrect there?
Yeah, no, that's right. And, just in general, broad strokes, you have to look by type of ethnicity. And I think in general, it's true that Korean Americans tend to be more Republican even after a couple of generations. Okay. And obviously, Vietnamese Americans also tend to lean a little bit more center right. But I think that there's a coastal divide. And it certainly has been my experience that Asian American students on the coasts tend to be the most wildly left-wing. And then, generations, because, when you don't experience the kind of adversity that our parents and grandparents had to overcome, there's also sort of a general diminishing of gratitude for the opportunities that the American dream has offered. And I think that lends itself to explaining why we're in such dire straits, with outreach toward these students.
It is a weird time. And one last point before you go, because you touched on this before we went to the web extended version. You've talked about journalism and sort of we're in a post-blog internet. That is so true. We've talked about this off air. Listen, the website, Louder with Crowder Web, a lot of people listen to this podcast. The show is syndicated. We do a few million hits a month, and I employ a few people. We're incredibly grateful. But we put out a handful of pieces of content a day compared to the average last time it was about 54 for a lot of these right-wing sites that have never created an original piece of content. When it started, I remember there was Hot Air, and there were a few sites where I would check and go because there was not only breaking news, but there would be insightful commentary. And that's morphed into the biggest sites just taking the commentary from other people or original content and just profiting immensely. Have you watched this evolution in again, conservatives are probably the worst offenders right now. Where do you see it going? Where do you see this finally ending up?
Yeah, well, I think, over the many years that I've been in both parts of the business, both old media and new media, it's always frustrating when you're an original content creator to see your work appropriated, outright stolen, recycled, and hat-tipped in a less than generous way, particularly among your own friends or people who are supposed to respect intellectual property rights. But
I don't have any friends. I mean, I consider you a friend. I don't really have many friends in the movement anymore. I just, I don't play nice.
You know what? I would just say not only to keep your chin up, but just keep cranking out that original content, because content will always, 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 always be king. no matter how many Snapchats and BuzzFeeds and Upworthies seem to, crowd the moment at the time. And just, that's all you can do is every day wake up and relish the opportunities that you have to make a living doing what we do. And you know what? You can wake up every morning and look at yourself in the mirror, and I'm sure I can't say that is true of a lot of these.
Well, I can't.
People.
I've gained some weight here with a back injury, so I'm looking quite flabby. We can't all be Michelle Malkins. It is a weird time, though. You talk about that. I guess to sort of go back, let's say young Michelle, but let's take, not that, younger Michelle. Let's say we go back and Michelle Malkin getting started up, but in 2015, how do you think you would have approached it differently? As far as just, again, now the main conservative websites are just aggregators. And if you write something that's going to go viral, no one's going to syndicate you. No one's going to support you. They're going to copy paste it and write H/T in little letters. How do you think you would have overcome it, being the brilliant lady that you are?
It's tough. I because that it's a sort of double-edged sword.
Right.
If you're constantly spending all of your time calling out people for stealing your stuff, then that's distracting you from putting out more content.
Right.
And you don't want to have it become such a diversion that it stops you from, that it becomes a wrench in your entire enterprise. I think one or two making a few choice examples of people and helping that it acts as a deterrent and being public about it, when you feel it's necessary. But, as always, in all aspects of life, it's always about picking and choosing your battles.
This is true. How true that is. Well, I don't ask for me. I ask for all the other kids getting started, because I get people asking me how to start with videos now, and I say, you know what? I don't know how to. I say this is what you can do. You can do great content. You can be original, and I had people like, and I'm very, you didn't build that. Well, that's true. It wasn't the government, but I had people like you and, yes, Andrew Breitbart and Glenn Reynolds and Ed Morrissey and people who supported it just because they supported the content. I told you about this off air. I certainly won't name names, but I've had big conservative sites approach me and go, hey, if you pay us, we'll run your videos. And I'm just like, they were dumbfounded that I said no. So of course not.
Mm-hmm.
You make money. You make me. It's just you have the ads, whether the video's there. Of course not. Well, we'll just go with someone else's video. Well, fine. And so when I have kids come up now when I do speaking and they say, well, how do I get started? I say, you know what? I couldn't tell you exactly. I've built enough of a platform beforehand, and we're continually building it. But I don't know if I'd have been able to get started back then. And that's the weird thing. Only a few years. I mean, I imagine if you're graduating with even like a marketing degree 4 years ago, it's no longer relevant. Things change so quickly.
Yeah. I guess my last parting advice would be for anyone starting in this business that as long as you maintain your trust and integrity with your viewership, people will be loyal to you. They will come to you because they know that your word is good, that your information is good, and you have to build up a track record in order to do that. And so, yes, that means that occasionally these awful things will happen. You'll have to deal with unethical people. You have to thicken your skin. But you just have to keep at it every day. And if you believe in yourself and you have a team that believes in you, I cannot tell someone, don't give up. I can't tell someone, well, there's all these vultures out there, better, try a different line of work, because they're going to be in every industry of the economic sector.
And on that note, the one advantage we have at Louder with Crowder is wiener jokes. Of course, wiener jokes help us a great deal. Sold
there
out.
You go.
Sold
There's your trust building tool right there.
I always tell them, don't trust us at all, especially on this show. People don't know, like, was this real or fake? People don't know because half of it are sketches and half of it is real. I'm like, listen, just assume none of it is real and go read Michelle Malkin's book. See, I tied it back here pretty well.
There
Sold
you go.
out to people listening. Thank you, Michelle. We appreciate it so much. Thank you for watching this video and taking a break from salacious internet pornography. We know it may be by accident, but we appreciate it anyway. And you can watch one of these other free videos or click subscribe by punching my face with your mouse. That's kind of fun. Or punching the subscribe button where we've actually written it out for you. It's all free. But there probably aren't going to be any breastises.